Good morning. My name is Gene Xu. I am founder of EME China Consultants. And sometimes, in order to drive the conversation forward, you have to talk about something that you normally wouldn't talk about. So, a lot of things are just very politically sensitive. And generally speaking, if you're doing business in China or in any other foreign country, you should generally try to avoid any type of politics. They say kind of like religion and politics are just topics that you should avoid. But in order to drive the conversation forward, I think it's important to try to have an honest examination of something that is very, very divisive. So, what I want to do is, I've actually not even watched this clip yet, and I don't have a research team, and I'm not prepared to really take a position. But what I want to do is, I want to examine a news thing that came out on CNN, and it talks about what happened. It's reporting on the Tiananmen incident 30 years ago. And whether you call it a massacre or an incident, it's important to really understand what side of this debate you are on to be aware of how you actually feel. So let's take a look at what's being reported.
Today, the world is marking 30 years since hundreds of protesters were killed in China's images have remained iconic examples of democratic protests. Tank Man is perhaps the most...
Okay, so you can see that the tagline or the headline is basically saying Tiananmen Square Massacre. All right, so I think just the way that title is classified in English is kind of very insightful, and it's divisive. And if you are not Chinese, that means you were not directly affected by this incident that happened 30 years ago. You really have to try to put into context how people on both sides feel about this. All right, so let's see what it says.
Famous photo from that moment. The unidentified men blocked Chinese tanks in the middle of the road the morning after the massacre. He was eventually pulled to safety by onlookers. It's estimated Chinese authorities killed hundreds, if not thousands, of pro-democracy protesters over the course of one day. An official death toll has never been released, unsurprisingly. The Chinese government tightly controls any mention of even the name Tiananmen Square in relation to what happened. Not only...
Okay, so, just for a little bit of context, I was born and raised in the United States, and I was probably about 13 or 14 years old in 1989. And I can actually remember seeing that Tank Man incident live on TV. And if you try to be kind of self-aware, I grew up in America, the land of freedom and democracy, or whatever you want to say it is. And so when I was viewing this 30 years ago, obviously, I was also heavily influenced as a very young adolescent by what the media was reporting. And back in those days, obviously, every overseas Chinese in America was hoping that China would become more democratic and perhaps more integrated into the global system as we knew it back then. But anyway, let's just see what happens.
Beijing blocked all of our TV reporting about the massacre, but Chinese censors have gone further today. China's firewall has shut off access to CNN.com and many other news outlets. Earlier today, our Matt Rivers was reporting live from Beijing. He was talking about Tiananmen Square when all of a sudden, undercover security forces showed up to harass and interfere with his live report.
Okay, so harass and interfere. Before we get into harass and interfere, there's a lot of controversy or debate about what's going on with the internet these days. And there's a lot of people saying that soon we will have a bifurcated internet where the 1.4 billion people in China have one version of the internet that's heavily censored and restricted. And then there's the quote unquote free internet in the rest of the world. But the thing is the internet that we all enjoy here in the United States It's definitely not a perfect system. In fact, how do we solve the problem of all of these fake news and fake accounts and foreign countries and adversaries using this kind of free internet to influence people's perceptions, right? I mean, we have the whole thing about the 2016 elections and how all of these fake Facebook accounts were created. So I think a lot of people who are not happy with how the US elections was affected by a free internet would embrace more controls. And there are controls. The question is, where do you put those controls and who gets to decide what those controls are? So CNN being harassed in Beijing while reporting on Tiananmen Square, for China to want to, for the Chinese government to really want to preserve harmony and restrict foreign media from reporting or misreporting what's going on, I think is natural and understandable. And there's always examples that we can give of how we as Americans would feel if, say, some Russian reporter was suddenly in front of Facebook and making a very negative report about Facebook's contribution to whatever. So we just have to put everything into kind of context, be self-aware, and be empathetic to all the groups that have different feelings about this type of situation.
Him kept filming. Take a look.
If you stick your neck out and you start talking about we're not sure who this gentleman is here, plainclothes police officer more than likely. So what we're going to do now, Rosemary, I'm going to toss it back to you in the studio. Natalie, you can just back up. We don't want to antagonize the situation, but this is what happens when you talk about Tiananmen Square. Okay. So what's happening here is that
plainclothes police officer. No, I don't think that was a plainclothes police officer. Now, there are a lot of Chinese citizens and netizens who are obviously very patriotic, and they don't like the way that China is portrayed in the Western media, and there's justification for that. And also, you have to keep in mind that China and America are currently in the midst of a trade war. Not just tariffs, but America is imposing restrictions on a lot of Chinese national champions. And of course, it's the Huawei situation. So, just imagine if Apple was banned in China, what would we as Americans kind of think? So, yeah, I don't think this was a security person, but let's see what happens. Maybe security people actually do come. And let's see what happens.
Police officers don't want to be captured on camera pushing us away, but then they bring in people like this who clearly are working for security forces in some way, shape, or form, but they just don't want us to be here.
Yeah, now whether that was security forces or not, who knows? But I think the way that it's reported, it's unfortunate that CNN doesn't have a reporter in China that can actually speak Chinese. Because what would have been interesting is for that person to stop recording, stop reporting, and then just have a really honest conversation to try to listen to what that person is trying to achieve or how that person feels about the foreign media coming in. And you got to remember, CNN generally is more trusted by more people, I think. But, even America's own president continuously refers to CNN as fake news. And whether you think it is fake news or you don't think it is fake news, it's always interesting to just put these things into a greater context and perspective and try to look at all sides of a very, very divisive issue. And as a business application, if you are doing business in China, you really want to just avoid taking a position or taking a stance on these highly divisive and really contentious issues, because your goal for being in China should be to achieve your business objectives, not try to spread democracy or take a moral stance against an entire country of people just because there are certain things that you disagree with. Okay, so anyway, this could be a very divisive video. I've tried to be as objective as possible. I know there's going to be a lot of contentious comments. Again, I want to encourage everybody just to try to be empathetic to the other side, try to provide a constructive comment, and anybody who provides a direct attack on anybody else in this video, you are not doing your own side or your own country or your own people justice. Our goal is to try to work better together and see if we can do that through more constructive dialogue, greater empathy for people on the other side, and of course, greater self-awareness and cultural awareness. All right, thank you.